Hello and welcome to Somerville Community Access Television and Greater Somerville's continuing coverage of the 2015 municipal elections. I'm Joe Lynch, producer and host of Greater Somerville, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to the 5 Alderman-at-Large candidates whose names will appear on the November 3rd, 2015 ballot. The 5 candidates for Somerville Alderman-at-Large are John Connolly, Sean Fitzgerald, Mary Jo Rossetti, Dennis Sullivan, and William White. We hope you find these candidate profiles helpful when you vote in this year's election. If you need more information about voting in this year's municipal election, please visit the City of Somerville's website or call the Elections Department at City Hall. As always, stay safe, stay informed, and thank you for watching. And I'm here with Alderman-at-Large Bill White, 9-term Alderman-at-Large in the City of Somerville and 2-term President of the Board of Aldermen in the City of Somerville. It is my pleasure to welcome him back to Somerville Community Access Television. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Joe. It's always a pleasure to be here.
And you are no stranger to Union Square. I'm not. Other folks have heard it. You were born in this area, right down here in the Union Square district. So, Bill, you know, there are some folks who arrived in our fair city prior to the last election or just prior and post last election. So I figure it's always better to have the candidate tell the viewers a little bit about themselves. Take it away.
All righty. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, as you said, I grew up in this neighborhood, and that actually had an effect on me. It was a working class neighborhood back then, first and second generation immigrants and children of immigrants. Where the Target is today was an operating slaughterhouse when I was a kid. And one of the things that had an impact on me was the help that people gave me, for instance, in college and in high school, the teachers with scholarship assistance. And it allowed me to go to Harvard College and then Georgetown Law School, get a law degree, clerk for a federal judge, and then go into private practice. But it wasn't just me, it was my parents, of course, but also the help of a lot of people. And the community that we had then had programs in place to help people. So I became interested in politics, and a lot of what I've tried to do on the Board of Aldermen is to give back to the community, to put things in place to help folks out, especially who may be disadvantaged, to make Somerville an attractive place for a whole cross-section of folks with a wide variety of backgrounds and beliefs, but making it a community, not just a place where people come, they hang their coat up, maybe they stay a year or two and move on. My goal is to do whatever I can as an alderman to create that sense of Somerville community and keep it moving in that direction. So we're not a place of strangers, but a real community with a lot of social groups, civic groups, where people are engaged and they can believe they're participating in their future.
Well, I think, Bill, you and I both being native-born sons here in the city, we remember, Somerville is a great place during our youth of community and civic groups. And then we also remember when Somerville was a little rough around the edges. In the recent years, the renaissance of the city of Somerville, you touched on it earlier in your intro, is that, it's a great place to live. People want to live here now. We're becoming a city of those that have and those that don't. So one of the things, I've asked some of the other Alderman-at-Large candidates to address right off the bat is the affordability issue here in the city. It seems to be the hot topic in some of the other alderman races. It's the hot topic certainly in my neighborhood, and I'm sure it's the hot topic in yours. Affordability in Somerville, gentrification, set aside for affordable housing. You take it away.
Sure, thank you, Joe. Affordability encompasses a number of things. One of the things that I did was I put in, many years ago, a residential tax exemption. Originally, when I was an alderman, it had been 17%. I put in legislation to 30%, and now it's 35%. I called on the creation of a home rule petition. That saves, this is a resident Somerville homeowner, $2,400 a year. So how does that help affordability? It helps it in two ways. One is If we didn't have that, just think a lot of homeowners out there, if you were paying $2,400 a year more in taxes, would you be staying in Somerville? And also, what kind of rents would you charge? I think it's fair to say, and again, I don't want to chastise all absentee landlords, but usually folks who live in their house have a little different view of who they're going to rent to. They like to rent to longer-term tenants. They're not going to cram 4 and 5 people into a unit. They're not going to, wreak havoc in the neighborhood. Generally, they're going to be good with things like trash, cleanliness, and noise. So one of the ways to keep Somerville affordable is through the residential exemption. And what we're noticing now, Joe, is most of the homes that are rented, for instance, Somerville, are 2- and 3-family homes. And because of the residential exemption, we're able to keep track of what's happening with our resident homeowners. And a lot of the resident homeowners now are selling in the 2- to 3-family house range. And what they're selling to, unfortunately, a lot of them are the absentee landlords. Because housing prices are so high, somebody who's going to buy a house to live in it is going to be outbid by somebody who's going to use that house for rental. So we're seeing a lot of the rental properties that could go to families and be affordable being lost. So we have to make up that difference. So one of the ways to do that is through the affordability increasing in the set-aside.
So before we get into it, though, Bill, I don't think you're suggesting that we tell these existing 2-family homeowners that they can't sell for a greater profit. I think what you're saying is it's a conundrum that folks who have owned their 2-family or 3-family home for years and years and years, and maybe at the end of, thinking about retirement, that's a perfectly legitimate strategy for them to sell. The problem comes in is that it's the absentee landlord who may not have the commitment to community.
Right, no, of course, nobody would, there's no way you can restrict anybody from selling their house, and that it would be silly for anybody to assume that we should even do that as a city. No, that's what somebody owns. So what you have to do is take into account the market forces and try to then help it out. So yes, so when somebody sells their house to the highest bidder, right now the folks who are paying the highest amount are pretty much going to be your absentee landlords who are going to use it for rental properties, and generally the rents that they have to get just to justify the price that they're paying are more than a resident would pay. So you see your rents going up and families being priced out and being substituted again with, say, young professionals or with students who, 4 or 5 of them together, chip in to pay the rent. So as a city official, seeing those housing units lost, we have to make up for it. So one of the ways you try to make up for it is by increasing the percentage set aside. And that doesn't apply to 2, 3, 4-family houses. So it really doesn't affect any average or regular Somerville homeowner.
Mainly new development.
This is going to be the new development that's going to be affected. And everything you see there, it's top dollar that's being charged. So it isn't that you're having like substandard property, you can't have the percentage increased because then the developer will say, well, I can't do it as a profit. No, these are prime
What should we tell those developers
estate.
if he says he can't do it as a profit? We'll find another developer who can.
If it's city-owned property, yes. And if it's clear that the city is going to insist on a higher percentage set aside, then maybe the developer who now owns the property and then who's selling it to another developer won't be able to sell it for as much. But again, it does not affect the average Somerville resident. It's really an effect upon developers who are now making much more money on these developments. This is not the Somerville of the 80s where, unfortunately back then we had a lot of substandard housing and people would say, well, you don't want to quell or put a damper in development because we have all of this substandard housing that we need improved. Our housing stock right now is among the best in the Commonwealth to begin with. So these are really, when you look at it, it's getting to the heart of major developments that are going to generate millions of dollars, and we're looking for just an increase in the affordable housing set aside. And what I would like it to do also is to be set aside first for Somerville residents who are being displaced. So if you live in an area because developments are going and your rents are going up, you're
for
being
instance,
displaced,
Union Square.
Union Square, then you, as a Somerville resident in the area, would have priority. And then second, I would like it then to go to Somerville residents in general before it goes to folks from outside of Somerville.
Where do you think we should go from 12.5 to what, 15, 20,
15,
25?
I haven't heard anybody suggest 20. I've heard 15. There was a recent proposal that was just submitted by a number of Somerville voters to go to 20%. You know, I look forward to looking at the studies that we're going to have for it to see 15 or 20. Maybe it will be 20% in certain areas, 15% in others. You know, again, it's just been presented, and I always like to look at the arguments on both sides before making a final conclusion. I have concluded it has to be raised. It's just now a matter of the percentage and where that percentage would be appropriate.
You've been around the city for many, many years. You've heard the arguments on parking. You've heard the complaints on rats. You've heard about taxes and water and fees and fines. Talk a little bit about it and then wrap it up with one of the things that I think all of the candidates are saying is that crime, violent crime in this city has taken a precipitous drop, and that's something that everyone should be proud of.
Yeah, as an alderman at large, I've historically put in an order where we go over the crime statistics in our Committee on Public Health and Public Safety, and you see the crime statistics for anything that would be considered violent or you know, non-penny ante type of crime going down. I mean, you do have some house break-ins that sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down, and that actually can depend upon, you know, a couple of folks if they're released from prison and, you know, they're not put in a program or whatever, or, you know, especially if it's drug-related. Sometimes you'll see one or two people responsible for an increase
multiple crimes
in areas. So putting those aside, our police department has done a tremendous job. Somerville, you know, is, when you look at the statistics, a safe community. You know, we've addressed the rodent problem, state of the art. Now they're working in conjunction with an outfit that's doing studies on basically rodent birth control. I mean, people laugh about it, but that's one of the things that's most effective. They believe. And the other thing we're trying to do is educate folks, because, you know, when people have rodent problems in an area, they'll say, well, maybe the city, why don't you bait? Baiting is only effective if there's no other food source.
Right.
A lot of times there are food sources. So what we have is a program where the inspectors actually go through the neighborhoods and, you know, seek out sources, inform, you know, residents about things they could do maybe to cut down on potential food and water sources for the rodents.
Well, I think one of the things that, you know, the city did do was to institute the standardized recycling and trash receptacles. And quite frankly, in my own neighborhood, it's cut down significantly because, as you say, you know, the absentee landlords are dependent sometimes, and I have a lot of friends who are renters, but the renters weren't as diligent on trash night. You know, you'd see the big trash bags go out on the sidewalk on trash night. That's a buffet for the rats that are in the neighborhood. So kudos to the city for that. But let's go into one of the other things that the Traffic Commission has recently instituted, which is the new snow removal policy. My phone and my texts started to go off the hook when that came in. There are people who are thrilled about it. There are other folks who are saying, why are you giving me the burden of this? Your thoughts on it?
Well, first, I'm glad you mentioned, Joe, there's the Traffic Commission. A lot of folks, especially those new to Somerville, think the Board of Aldermen would have control over things like traffic regulations, one-way streets, and the like. Back in the late 70s, the city charter was amended so that there is actually a separate a separate Traffic Commission that is set up, and they are independent of the Board of Aldermen, and they have the total say. Now, since I was first elected on the Board of Aldermen, folks on the other side of the street have raised complaints about how unfair it was that there was parking only on one side of the street during snow emergencies, and the board looked at it, and it made recommendations to the mayor and the Traffic Commission, but ultimately it was the Traffic Decision's decision, and now they finally made the decision to go to the alternate approach, which I think is equitable.
So the Board of Aldermen set up the Traffic Commission?
No, there was a city charter
amendment. Charter.
Right.
So take a city charter to undo that, to take the commission out from underneath an autonomous state and put it back under the Board of Aldermen.
Yeah, essentially, I think it even requires a referendum of the voters to vote to take away the Traffic Commission, because the view back then was, instead of making traffic decisions political, like instead allow, supposedly, you know, the professionals with traffic engineer, police, fire, other DPW involved to look at it, we'll say, quote unquote, objectively.
Let the professionals do it rather than the professional politicians.
Right, that's what the view was.
The mayor has proposed over the last few years spending oodles of money for a new high school, a new library, new police headquarters, new fire headquarters, you name it. I noticed that the Board of Aldermen recently approved a bonding for some, I don't know if it's 100 or 200 million, but $100 million for a new high school, a new library, new police headquarters, new fire headquarters, you name it. I noticed that the Board of Aldermen recently approved a bonding for some, I don't know if it's 100 or 200 million, but $100 million a study on the city hall itself to try to do some needed repairs and bring it up to speed. Your thoughts, Bill, on how much of this realistically can get done over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? And what are your thoughts about borrowing? A lot of people use the word bonding. I call it borrowing. What are your thoughts?
Well, as Alderman, who one time was chair of finance and now is president, I'm always concerned about bonding because you have to make sure that debt service does not become a burden. Now, people will see every year we pass bonds, but the truth of the matter is bonds are also retired every year. So the fact that the city issues bonds doesn't necessarily mean your debt is going up because others could have been retired. So you want to try to keep it constant within a certain range. Now, yes, the mayor has called for a number of things which raise the question, would we have the ability to pay that debt service for a new high school, a new library, like you say? So one of the things you have to look at is, first, what kind of assistance can we get for these things? So hopefully from the state we'll get 80% reimbursement. So yes, there'll be a sizable amount, but we really do need a high school. A library, is another question. Can a library or a police or a fire station be incorporated with proposed developments? So as part of the deal with the developer, we either get it for free or you get it at a substantially reduced price as part of the package that the developer provides. So yes, we have to be very cautious and we have to explore alternative ways to get these things built. Because right now we're at our Proposition 2.5 limit, and we've been that way for a while. So every year we're taxed to the maximum. If your debt service were to go up at a percentage basis higher, then you would either have to cut someplace else or you would have to try a Proposition 2.5 override. At this point, I do not think the public would be, willing to go for Proposition 2.5
And I don't think I'm going to find any of the candidates for Alderman at Large who are going to say yes, they'd be willing to do it. Right. Bill, 15 minutes goes fast here at SCATV, so I want to thank you for coming back down. How can folks get a hold of you?
The easiest way is to go to the city's website. My telephone number is there and my email address. My email address is william.a.white@verizon.net.
Great.
My phone number is 617-625-9100.
Thank you, Bill. My guest has been 9-term Alderman at Large and 2-term President of the Board of Aldermen. Thanks for watching. See you next time.